Namaste. Myself Trini Khurana, Assistant Professor, Faculty Physiotherapy and Diagnostics JVN, Rajasthan. Today we are going to discuss about encephalitis. Encephalitis is acute inflammation of the brain due to a viral infection which causes loss of brain function. Encephalitis usually begins with flu-like symptoms such as fever and headache. Symptoms can then rapidly progress within hours, and a person may experience confusion, seizures, that is, fits, and loss of consciousness. Diagnosis of encephalitis. This is important to get a prompt and accurate diagnosis if encephalitis is suspected to reduce damage to the brain. It is also vital that other causes of the symptoms such as meningitis or stroke are ruled out, as these conditions require different treatment. There are two main tests that are used to diagnose encephalitis. It is CT, that is computerized tomography, scan, and lumbar puncture. Now, what causes encephalitis? There are two main causes of encephalitis, which include infectious encephalitis and post-infective encephalitis. In case of infectious encephalitis, the brain is directly infected by a virus which damages the brain tissue, such as the herpes simplex virus, or a childhood virus such as mumps, measles, and rubella. In case of post-infective encephalitis, the body's own immune system attacks the brain tissue days or weeks after viral infection, and it is unclear why this occurs. Now, what are the symptoms or effects of encephalitis? Initial symptoms of encephalitis can vary from mild to severe cases. Symptoms may include fever, headache, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, confusion, fits or seizures, problems with speech or hearing, and memory loss. Long-term complications of encephalitis as a result of brain damage may include physical symptoms are muscle weakness of one or both sides of the body, reduced sensation, increased muscle tone, that is spasticity, or decreased muscle tone, which is flaccidity, poor balance in sitting and standing, difficulty controlling movement of the arms and legs for everyday actions, reduced mobility, decreased exercise tolerance. And the non-physical symptoms are memory loss, personality changes, epilepsy, problem with speech and language. Now, what are the physiotherapeutic measures for encephalitis? Neurological physiotherapists are experienced in assessing and treating problems with the movement and loss of physical skills, which may occur following encephalitis. Physiotherapy will help enhance ability with everyday tasks by focusing on increasing head and trunk control, improving sensation and joint sense, promoting and facilitating normal movement in the arm, trunk, and legs, improving balance, improving posture, increasing muscle strength, improving and maintaining joint range of movement, relieving pain, enhancing independence with functional tasks such as rolling, sitting, standing, and walking, improving quality of life. A full assessment of current needs will be carried out and an individual treatment plan developed to meet those needs. This will ensure that make the best possible recovery and reach maximum physical potential. Physiotherapy treatment includes exercises to facilitate normal movement pattern and improve ability with functional tasks. Practicing functional activities such as rolling, sitting, sit to stand, and walking. Stretching and strengthening program to relieve stiffness and increase muscle strength, which will make everyday tasks much easier. Advice regarding posture, lying, sitting, and standing. Balance training, focusing on sitting and standing balance to help maximize mobility. Advice about walking aids and specialist seating if necessary. Manual handling training sessions for carers and families, which will include therapeutic handling, transfers, and positioning techniques to increase comfort and promote postural alignment. The therapeutic use of hoist and slings can also be taught. Initial approach is It is important to follow a structured, systematic approach to ensure good clinical care of the patient and to aid diagnosis. In an acute situation, the patient's airway, breathing, and circulation must be assessed. Therefore, a primary survey is undertaken, and for this, an ABCD approach is employed. Determining the patency of the airway is crucial for the survival of patient. In general assessment of airway patency, a clinician must observe the face and the neck. Abnormalities in the jaw, mouth, and neck must be noted, as these could lead to airway compromise and future complications. Speaking to the patient, example by asking their name and observing their response, such as able to communicate in full sentences, is a good indicator of unobstructed airways. Changes in vocalization can be due to asthma, COPD, emboli, edema, or even pneumonia. If any of these conditions are suspected, a definitive diagnosis must be obtained, as any of these could lead to further deterioration of the patient. The second stage of the primary survey is the assessment of breathing. Begin with observation of the patient. Looking for signs of respiratory distress is important, and failure to recognize this can lead to fatal consequences. Signs of respiratory distress can be the use of accessory muscles or changes in the chest movement, and in some cases even both. Observation of chest for any deformity is important, but systemic observation is crucially important as well, as because it can show signs of cyanosis. At this point, the respiratory rate needs to be measured. Then proceed to auscultate the chest and then end in percussion. Oximetry is also undertaken to determine the patient's oxygen saturation. Third step in the process is an assessment of the circulatory system. This is multi-dimensional assessment, and many factors must be taken into account. As part of the circulatory assessment, examination of extremities is undertaken to determine if they are warm or cool, as a way of assessing perfusion. Next, press the nail bed for 5 seconds, and if the refill is less than 2 seconds, the capillary refill time is normal. Now position the patient at a 45-degree angle and observe the filling of jugular vein. This is an indicator of the jugular venous pulse, and in a healthy person the filling should be less than 3 cm. The clinician should then proceed to measure BP and auscultate the heart for murmurs. If an abnormality is suspected, an ECG should be performed. After these vital steps are done, the clinician should move to the lower extremities. Clinician should start with palpating the peripheral pulses. These are femoral, popliteal, and posterior tibial artery, as well as arteries of the upper limbs. Examination of the calf muscle should also be undertaken for DVT. IV accesses should be obtained as soon as if there are signs of hemodynamic compromise. Assessment of disability is the last step of primary assessment. The AVPU score can be calculated, or a calculation of the Glasgow Coma Scale. Pupillary light reflex and posturing can indicate if there is neurological damage and severity of encephalitis. Measurement of capillary glucose can also be performed in this stage. Now the next step is clinical interview. Clinical interview can be divided into presenting complaint, history of presenting complaint, past medical history, family history, medication history, and social history. Each part can give insight into the likelihood of encephalitis and the important signs to look for while performing the clinical examination. Personal history commences by obtaining the basic demographic details of the patient, confirming the correct patient by verifying the name, age, and sex of the patient. These basic details can also give some insight into etiological agents of encephalitis, as different etiological agents have their own hierarchy type in transmission regarding age and sex. Next, chief complaint. The onset of symptom can give an indication of the etiology of encephalitis. However, incubation period of the pathogen vary and overlap, so it can be difficult to determine the etiology from the onset of symptoms. Fever is a common complaint in encephalitis. Fever characteristics can be significantly different in various causes. However, caution must be taken as fever is pathognomonic for various illnesses ranging from infections to autoimmune or even malignancy. Next is past medical history. Past medical history can demonstrate key risk factors of the patient suffering from encephalitis. Example, any condition which would leave the patient with an immunodeficiency like HIV, cancer, or even a primary immunodeficiency in patient exhibiting symptoms of encephalitis would merit immediate diagnostic procedures. It is essential to consider if the patient is up to date with their vaccinations. In an unvaccinated patient, the most common cause of encephalitis would be due to varicella virus. The most common cause in a vaccinated patient is herpes simplex virus. Other facts which need to be considered are previous episodes of fever, as some causes of encephalitis have a pattern of remitting fever. It is also important to ask the patient if they have any recollection of being bitten by mosquito or ticks, as this can indicate possible etiological agents. Next is family history. Primary immunodeficiency can predispose a patient to the risk of encephalitis as well as other infections. So, if a history of immunodeficiency is obtained, the patient should immediately commence treatment with immunoglobulins. An example wherein the family history is vital is if the etiology of encephalitis is contagious and other members of the family experiences symptoms of an infection or has shown symptoms of encephalitis. This may be useful in reaching the diagnosis of encephalitis or even determine the etiology of encephalitis. However, expression of symptoms in any illness is highly variable amongst individuals, and that is something which should be kept in mind. Next is medical history. Medications can cause cognitive changes and fever. So, a medication history should be obtained to ensure that the symptoms are not due to chemical disturbance. Prescription drugs, non-prescription drugs, and even recreational drug use should be noted. Next is lifestyle history. Different continents have different common etiological agents of encephalitis, so a history of travel should be documented. If a person is inclined to an outdoor lifestyle, this should also be taken into account, as they are at higher risk of being bitten by tick mosquitoes depending on their demographics. Season affect behavior pattern. Example, mating pattern in mosquitoes, so the season should be noted. Next is physical examination. After performing the primary survey and the clinical interview, secondary survey can be undertaken. Some manifestation of encephalitis which may be encountered. First is general observation. During general observation, we can start by assessing the skin. Some etiological agents which can cause encephalitis also cause dermatological lesions. Prime example is viral cause of encephalitis, which is HSV. HSV also causes herpetic skin lesion, which should be noted and is a good mean to reach a fast diagnosis. Next is examination of eye. Many etiological agents of encephalitis can cause ocular symptoms. During a HSV infection, the patient can develop keratoconjunctivitis. For a patient with an EBV infection, or periorbital edema may be noted. Next is examination of oral cavity. Oral involvement is common in many viral disorders. Example, HSV, ulcer of the buccal mucosa and the tongue are observed. Next, examination of abdomen. Mycoplasma is a very rare cause of ascites. More commonly, cutaneous lesion upon the abdomen should be noted. Next is neurological examination for cranial nerves, motor system, reflexes, coordination, sensory system. Now the diagnosis, it is diagnosed by the help of EEG, radiography, MRI, lumbar puncture, serology. Thank you.